The Organizing Committee of International Conference on Malay, Arabic and English Literature 2022. Fellow researchers and presenters, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good day everyone. My name is Nurul Atiqah Amran from University Putra, Malaysia, and with my co-authors, Muhammad Aliff Amran and Wafda Rohhimi, we'll be presenting our research entitled Dissecting the Representations of ALEXITHYMIA in a Translated Korean Literature, the Case of WON-PYUNG's ALMOND, a Novel. At the Children's Literature Assembly Workshop 2016, Cami McGovern shared her experience as a former author for the adults genre but changed her direction to write children's literature to connect with a child diagnosed with autism. In her remarks, she encouraged authors to portray children with disability in their books by highlighting their strengths and the joy in the differences. Teenagers with particular disabilities or sicknesses process their differences to coexist with other normal kids and teenagers. Reading literature helps them to feel connected with similar pain, struggle, and hope, thus giving them the voices they need to break the barrier of differences. Literature conveys messages that their differences in physical and cognitive functions are their greatest strength. Our study examines a selected young adult literature that tells the story of two teenagers with emotional dysregulations. ALMOND, a Novel, was originally published in the Korean language in 2017 and the translated version was published in 2020. Unlike other common mental illnesses or brain disorders represented in literature, alexithymia in fiction has not been extensively explored and studied by literary critics. Therefore, it is important to examine the representations of the traits and states of the characters' emotional dimensions in navigating their lives as they are in society. Alexithymia is historically linked to psychoanalysis and closely related to other mental health conditions such as depression and autism. It is also explained as a personality trait or the disability to recognize one's feelings and differentiate them from bodily sensations besides exhibiting difficulties in describing their feelings to others. Another definition depicted that alexithymia is not considered a mental disorder as it is not classified in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. Now, the almond mentioned in this novel refers to the amygdala, a key region in the human brain that processes emotions, perception, conflict, fear conditioning, and reward learning. Wright also explained that the amygdala combines many sensory inputs that give the gut feeling, where memory and emotions are connected. Based on the extract from the novel, Sun described, when you get stimulated by something outside your body, this almond sends signals into your brain. Depending on the type of stimulation, you'll feel fear or anger, joy or sorrow. In literature, stories of mental illness are not restricted to the author's interpretations to portray and narrate the sickness, yet it focuses on the fictional characters. Fiction presents people who suffer from a specific condition, either medically diagnosed or other psychological difficulties caused and triggered by certain factors, the struggles and treatment given by others, and most importantly, the breaking of the stereotypes that the authors wish to convey and educate the society through their works. Some common sicknesses in fiction include obsessive-compulsive disorder known as OCD, cerebral palsy, cancer, bipolar disorder, to name a few. Based on the previous works that have been done on ALMOND, a Novel, very few highlighted the aspect of sickness. They also used other methods to study the characters, such as the descriptive qualitative method and discourse analysis. The close reading technique in our methodology is conducted to dissect the multifaceted nature of alexithymia and the symbolic use of illness in the novel. This reading technique is relevant to our investigation to identify the author's depictions of traits and states of the disorder. Drawing from Howard Brody's book, Stories of Sickness, this research identifies two themes. The first theme looks at the notion of sickness and the aspects that should be understood to understand sickness and the impacts that sickness has on individuals. Theme 2 examines the sickness and social relations regarding the family suffering and the misconception or judgment that the individuals with disorders receive. This novel is worthy of study because the two selected characters, Yoonji and Goon, are feature specific emotional dysregulations and individual voices. They create diversity beyond commonalities at the center throughout the story, where doctors, families, and societies are merely bit players in understanding their unique limitations and strengths. Now let's look at the two selected characters from the novel, Yoonji and Goon. Yoonji is a teenage boy born with a brain condition that lacks amygdala development in the brain. This brain condition causes him to exhibit a characteristic known as alexithymia, which means no words or feelings to regulate emotions. Goon is a problematic teenage boy with a troubled past. The people and places he lived with make up a massive part of his upbringing that turned him into a defiant and disrespectful teenager. Gun is a character that the author juxtaposes with Yoon-jae to highlight the stark contrast between two complex psychological phenomena. Their contradicting psychological conditions then connect these two, slowly developing mutual understanding. And then the two relied on each other in ways neither of them had ever experienced. Our analysis highlights how the author presents the character's dimensions of sickness. Yoon-jae understands the disruption in his brain that affects the cognitive ability to process emotions, and most importantly, the severity of the sickness that has robbed his defense mechanism for survival. For others, the condition of not being able to regulate emotion is seen as an advantage or a desirable trait that makes one looks impressive or cool. Still, they do not understand the direct consequences of suffering such abnormality. Broadly said, to be sick is to participate in the disruption of an integrated hierarchy of natural systems. On the contrary, Kun had a history of early emotional neglect and did not receive the same psychological intervention, leading to the increased severity of his alexithymia. When we did our second analysis for the second theme, the first step we took was to move away from the first narrative or Yoon-jae's narrative because we wanted to hear and see others' perspectives on the illness. Yoon-jae's mother was the first to recognize the changes in his development. At one point, the readers can feel her frustration and struggle to accept his condition. From Yoon-jae's perspective, his mother's persistent efforts and daily training were her desperation to make her son look normal like other children. However, he failed to see his mother's irretrievable tangle of guilt and regrets. On the other hand, Gun's father denies and rejects Gun's condition. Gun failed his first impression and is the total opposite of the child he had longed for 13 years. How Professor Yoon aggressively handled Gun and confronted his defiant attitude increases Gun's suffering. In this study, we found that the first suffering that the parents must bear is accepting the profound changes in their lives, especially in their children's lives. Before the child can understand their sickness, parents must be ready first to accept and adjust to the new responsibilities and challenges. Both mother and father in this story respond in different ways. Professor Yoon proved to have chronic adjustment difficulties. Meanwhile, Yoon-jae's mother took every measure to help and support her son to live like a normal kid. As the study has shown, mothers often adjust quicker than fathers, which is one of Yoon-jae's strengths despite his inability to express emotions. Based on our findings through the scientific papers, we figured that alexithymia is generally described as a personality trait used as a psychological disorder diagnosis. However, in the early notes in the novel, the author used the term disorder to represent alexithymia. Therefore, this shows that the author may have some misconceptions about alexithymia. Both Yoon-jae and Gun suffered the inability to express the emotions. The worst part is the misconception leading to a wrong judgment of their individuality without trying to understand their story or listen to their voices. In our study, we found evidence suggesting that Yoon-jae and Gun each belong to two subtypes of alexithymia, a non-neglect and neglect type. Yoon-jae's early intervention in his alexithymia helps to regulate his brain to process certain standardized emotions. However, Gun experienced early emotional neglect and grew up in a harsh environment. We found that parents also suffer from their children's emotional dysregulation. Alexithymia has disrupted the natural system in oneself, and because of that, it has also altered the characters' social roles and relationships. The novel has also established that the characters with this trait find strengths and joys in each other to navigate their lives in the world of limited vocabularies for emotions. To conclude, this study contributes to the knowledge of sickness in literature and stories of teenagers with a specific mental diagnosis. The emphasis on alexithymia and the complex story of individuals suffering from this disorder will benefit the development of science and society in general. The literary works encourage and support a more profound knowledge so mental health patients can connect with a compassionate and sympathetic community. Fictional writers and readers reinterpret an illness as a part of understanding individuality. The characters seek acceptance and a chance for a new life rather than a crisis. Almond, a novel, gives readers a chance to feel empathy and view the characters' overlooked and misunderstood conditions differently. These are the references that we used in the study. That's all from us. Thank you for listening.